Dave Pawski sent me these slides, so I'm going to go through them. And it's about the MAPS project, the B-26 that's there, and the relationship to the Susie-Q. Also, there's a Corsair portion at the end of this where they're rebuilding a Corsair, so we'll get to see a little bit of that. And Dave, sorry Dave could not be here this weekend. Okay, the nose art, you see the Susie-Q. What they did, they really decided to put it on the other side. On the pilot side is where the nose art typically is, okay? And it's Charlys Jewel, is that the name of it?
Yes.
So they put Susie-Q on the other side, right here. We thought, how could they do that so well? They have this picture provided by Sylvia. And you can take a look at this, you can see, well, you can see his gun right here, you can see his pocket size. You can't really see his hands anywhere, but you get an idea of proportion and measurement from there. But that was shown this morning from Ron's presentation.
Is that off of the aircraft?
Yeah.
Yep.
That is off of the aircraft. In fact, that's all that was left of the aircraft.
Is that right?
It's probably still in the lagoon there on Midway somewhere. And here's another shot, but here what you see here also is the hands, some of the vest. Of course, they know the sizes of all these things, and they get a little bit of an idea about how big these letters are and everything, the proportion of them. Of course, here's the Grinnell painting, and this is the painting you'll see in the museum on Wednesday. We do have it signed by Lieutenant Muri. It is right next to the continuous play video that has his interview in the continuous play video. But you can see the action across the deck. These look like rounds coming with tracers coming up from Japanese aircraft shooting down on the plane right here. And of course you see Susie-Q right there on the painting. Whatever SolidWorks is helped him out to figure out the sizing and proportion of this nose art name, the Susie-Q. And it was written out, and then it was put on the artwork. And Ray Hamlin here, and I don't know Ray, but Ray Hamlin did a pretty good job to kind of size it up and actually paint it on the fuselage and right under the co-pilot's window. And that's what it looks like. That's the approximate size on the aircraft. So if you could see on the other side, that's what it looks like on the aircraft. Same color, olive drab, and of course Susie-Q right there. And here's the artist making more panels. There was a panel made for Josh, for Sylvia, and then we have one that's for sale. So when you go in the store on the other side, in the other room, you'll see that in there. In fact, it was in here a couple hours ago for the presentation earlier. So you want to take a look at that. Then the Air Classics magazine from June of 22. We do have copies of this magazine. I have some on the table in the hospitality room. You want to take a look at it and see what's there. And these are fairly recent. What I always said when we have our board meetings, since I'm working with the fundraising part of it, is the way we raise money, and it doesn't happen overnight obviously, but the way we raise money is visibility. Be visible. Have people talking about you. Who are you? What's going on? This is a perfect example of that with the magazine articles about the B-26, and there have been several articles in the last couple months over the summer about the B-26 in general, and of course with Susie-Q right here. As you can see right here, they've got a picture of the plane that's at MAPS in Ohio. But you always have a depiction here of the Mark 113 torpedo, which was a terrible, terrible ordnance for going after ships. It hardly worked. It would bump into the side of the hull of the Japanese ship and it wouldn't do anything. Or it would go off, it wouldn't penetrate. And that was improved later on. They figured out they couldn't do anything with it. But these are really good photos to get you an idea of how to build, number one, the torpedo for display, but also the rack that was installed it wasn't really designed to have a torpedo rack on the bottom of the plane. I mean, it was designed to have doors opening up and bombs dropping off the bomb racks, okay? So that was an innovation and a modification, if you will, to the aircraft. But MAPS was able to take that and apply it to their rebuild, and that's what they did, from all the pictures they could find. Here's some more pictures of some of the modifications that MAPS had done right up here and right here. This is Peyton Magruder, Marshall Magruder's dad. And Marshall was probably a couple months old when the first flight of the B-26 happened in Baltimore, I believe. He was a little baby. But here's more pictures of the crew, and over on this side in the magazine article. And more on Susie-Q. But you can see some more of the modification that was done in the shop. There's a propeller for the torpedo. If you can get this magazine or take a look at it in the hospitality room, take a look at it.
Did they perfect the torpedo during the war?
Yes, they did. They replaced it with another model. Because it was the same one that they used out of the submarines. You know, you imagine a submarine going after a Japanese ship and they're counting off with their clicker and said, okay, and it hit. And it's like, they could hear the noise underwater of it. Boom. You know?
Yeah, right.
I guess I didn't get it, you know? Yeah, because that sound travels underwater very, very long distances. But anyways, take a look at the magazine article about MAPS and the B-26 in general. This is another piece of the article, the books, the two magazines that came out in June and July, where it shows the Navy version of the B-26, and it was used to tow targets and also some liaison work, you know, taking people around or moving supplies here and there. They really didn't use it for combat that I'm aware of.
Did they paint it navy blue or not?
Some of them were the, I'm trying to think of what the color scheme was called. I think it was shark blue or something like that. There was kind of a bluish, grayish color with a white, grayish underneath, you know, for camouflage. And of course, after a while, the Navy just made it a nice, solid navy blue aircraft. We had air superiority, but it didn't camouflage too much towards the end of the war. And another one here, another article in Air Classics about John Sharp writing about Miss Cookie Lee. Okay, and I'm not familiar with the name of the aircraft, but I am familiar with this right here. This is the 70th Bomb Squadron patch. I'm not going to be talking about the 70th tomorrow and what they did and what their adventures were. And also, I was telling Jerry this earlier. Everybody knows about my uncle in the 320th Bomb Group that flew with your relative. Well, I had a second relative in World War II that flew B-26s. And I'll talk about that tomorrow. But you want me to tell you today?
I'm curious.
You're all curious now. About my presentation tomorrow. Well, anyways, I'll tell you, and then you'll see the presentation tomorrow. Lieutenant Barton W. Cressy. He was on one of the flights that took the ships from California to Hawaii and then down to Fuji and then the Guadalcanal, and they did their missions there. Well, I saw my last name, C-R-E-S-S-Y. That's kind of, it's not an unusual name, but it's kind of like, wow, who's that? It's got to be a relative of mine. Well, my cousin who lives in, she lives in Michigan. She was a librarian, and she did her master's thesis 30-some years ago on genealogy. Of course, she did our family's genealogy. And went all the way back to the 1200s, 1300s to find out where we came from. Well, I contacted her. I said, do you know Barton W. Cressy from Ohio? And she said, and she got back with me. She said, yes, he's your 7th cousin once removed. Now, what does once removed mean?
I don't know.
I don't know either. I don't know why she even told me this. She just should have said I was the 7th cousin. What's that?
Next generation.
Next generation?
Straight across the cousin thing.
Okay, you still have me confused. I don't know.
That's what it is.
But anyways, I'm related to the guy. So I have 2 B-26 relations that fought in World War II. Okay, but like I said, go and take a look at some of those articles in the magazine we have. Okay, here's the Goodyear FG-1 Corsair and some of the projects that they have going on. The B-26 is essentially complete. And of course, they've been talking about that since we, probably about 5 years ago, about completing some things. I know they did some modifications on their own, construction on their own. I know they had a hard time finding a turret, gun assembly, and they finally found it. and pieced it together. But this one is a Goodyear FG-1. Now, during World War II, the Corsair plane was a very popular plane, a pretty hard-charging fighter plane. The Navy didn't want them in carriers because they had a hard time landing them safely. Part of the problem is the pilot could not see forward of the aircraft because of that long nose. They had trouble looking down at where they were going to land. A lot of bouncing around. So they gave them to the Marines. Okay, anything the Navy doesn't want, they give them the Marines. Well, anyways, there were 3 companies that built the Corsair model. Val Chance, who designed it, they contracted with Goodyear and Brewster Company. Okay, we have the Brewster-built Corsair, and it's the only one that's flying in the world today. It's a Brewster-built Corsair. We have it at the museum. You'll see that. But this is some of a depiction of what they did to kind of piece this back together. You see some of the sections. That's why you see FG-1 instead of F4U Corsair. Okay, this is a Goodyear built plane originally. There's some of the ribs and elevators. The elevator rather, it's not the ribs and spars. And it's all done by hand and reconfigured. It looks like they've got original documentation right here. So they get the exact measurements on what the elevators are, what they need. Here's another picture of the elevators. And eventually be covered with fabric. Did you know they had fabric on these planes?
Yeah.
Okay, and actually when you think of it, the fabric on the control surfaces on the Corsair being fabric, the Corsair was easier to steer. And I think the pilots can agree with this. It just handles the air differently, and it makes it like it's got power steering. So they made them out of cloth and hard, they were covered and hardened with the resin. But it was a lot lighter, it wasn't real rigid, but it was flexible. It made it easier to control.
So is this airplane one that's stored in the museum?
They're working on it right now at the Maps Museum in Ohio.
Well, which one was in the air show?
The one that was in the air show over the weekend is the one that's at our museum, at the National Museum of World War II Aviation, and that is a Brewster-built Corsair, but it's essentially a Corsair that Chance Valve designed. It's the same model.
And who is Brewster?
Well, that's what I'd like to know because they went out of business. The Navy fired them at the end of World War II because they screwed up their production line. The quality control was terrible. They had labor problems.
Where was the factory located?
Rich, do you know where Brewster was located? I'm not sure.
I think I can't remember exactly.
Might have been on the East Coast, I'm
It
thinking.
was like New York State, I can't remember.
Yeah. But anyways, they were contracted to build the Corsair model.
Long Island City.
Long Island City, very good, thank you, in New York. Now, what had happened, and the reason why they went another reason they went out of business, like I said, is that their quality control is so bad, they had different parts where they shouldn't be. And of course, the Navy found out what was going on, and they fixed the parts, but they never sent any of their Brewster models into combat. The British got theirs, and they used them in combat, but they fixed them before they flew. Probably giving you too much information right there. This is the rudder assembly, and you can see it being put on the tail of the aircraft. And some of the wing spar, the rear wing spar. And that's quite an intricate work. You got to have exact measurements on the documentation to put these together, build the molds for them, and then put them together. Does anybody know the name of the little tiny little stems that are on the sheet metal? Clickles? Clecos? Clecos. You know where that comes from? They were built by the Cleveland Pneumatic Tool Corp Company. And it's kind of a depiction of their name.
Cleveland tools are still around, they sell lots of.
Yeah, they are still around, that's right.
And those are temporary fasteners, right?
Okay, this is a 3D model of some of the major parts that they're working on right now. And it was done again in this software tool that they use, the 3D tool. And the wing spar in the front that allows for that design, that gull wing design in the front of the aircraft that you notice. And some of the work that's being done in the welding and the spar on the frame. Right here, there's the spar. And here's the body of the aircraft, right here, which would be towards the front. Okay.
They pivoted from the end of that, didn't they, to fold the wing out?
It was at the end, yeah,
Yeah.
it came up, yes.
And then that rocket that you just wrote.
Say your question again.
Well, it looked like a,
Well, it came out and then came out a little bit further, and then of course the
Yeah,
wing
then-
pops
yeah,
up like
that's
this
what-
on the outside. A little bit closer look at the wing spar. And this is the tail section with a fitting. Now, I was quite impressed with some of the machine shop here. I didn't realize how extensive they have at MAPS, how much equipment they have and the skill set that they have there. This young lady, 99 years old, was a Rosie. Now, she wasn't Rosie the Riveter. An interesting story about Rosie the Riveter. The poster that you see that's kind of like this, "We Can Do It." Trivia question, how long was that posted in World War II? How often did everybody see that poster?
Oh, I saw it all the time. Normal, I saw it all the time.
Okay, I tell you what happened. That poster that says "We Can Do It" was only posted in the Consolidated Aircraft Company's factory for 2 weeks in February 1944. It was not found again until 1980.
I saw a lot of
I
it.
was gonna
Well, the
say,
thing of it is, okay, let me clarify some stuff. The thing of it is, Rosie the Riveter was pretty popular as far as a name, and the women working in the factories. That was throughout the war. In fact, there was a song written about Rosie the Riveter,
Yeah.
and it was very popular. But the
The
Rosie,
ones are
the,
only, I remember seeing that one.
okay, well, the story of the poster is that it was only posted for 2 weeks and nobody ever saw it again.
God, I would have,
And it just spread
I'm
from
confused
that.
all
I
over.
think
So there's all kinds of stories. I'm maybe I've opened up a can of worms here.
I think
We all
But
have
anyways,
iPhones here.
The name Rosie the Riveter got stuck with a lot of women that were working the assembly line. Now, my mother worked as a drill press operator in Detroit at one of the factories, the Packard plant she was at on the east side of Detroit. So she was probably considered a Rosie the Riveter type person. Quick question.
I think this, of course, after the war, but I believe there was a stamp created with that image.
Oh, it was after the war. Yeah, it's a commemoration. The person that was actually identified in the original photo that was taken where the poster came from, they finally tracked down, and they tracked her down when she was in her 90s, and she died a couple of years later. But anyways, I won't open that can of worms anymore, so don't ask me anymore. Okay, but anyways, this lady was honored over there as a Rosie the Riveter type character. And these are pictures of her in the 1940s, very attractive lady. And there she is by the some of the aircraft parts, and this is by the Corsair engine. I think she worked on the Corsairs at the time in the war. There she is standing next to the aircraft. And what you see here is the rondelle right here with the red outline. The rondelle changed several times during the war. That red outline was only a very short period of time in 1943. So if you see that on a plane, you can identify what time period that aircraft is when it was issued to the Army, Air Force, or the Navy, or the Marine Corps. And there she is getting some with the University of Akron students, the engineering college there. And of course, they named the plane after her, Sweet Velda. And she did pass away, unfortunately, at 99 years old, and you're probably pretty close to passing away, and you gotta get ready for whatever you're going through. But they named it after her in her honor. And another Air Classics issue about that feature at MAPS. And that's the end of the slideshow.